In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to machine embroider an applique sweater. So be sure to watch until the end to learn the best tips and tricks, so let's get started. Attention all machine embroidery beginners. Are you struggling to hoop your fabrics, don't know what thread to use, or even what tension is? Sign up for our free Embroidery for Beginners course and become an expert in no time. Click the link in the description to get started. Now what we're going to need for this project is a sweatshirt. We're going to need our applique design and the applique material. Now we're using a very thin applique material that will most likely fray all on its own. So we have used a fusible interfacing on the back to reduce the fraying. So make sure you use the appropriate applique materials, and if it's too thin, make sure that you use an interface before you start. Now the other things we need are our thread. We're going to use two different colors of thread, one for the satin stitch, one for the accent running stitch around the outside. We're going to use the appropriate hoop size for the design. Again, we always try to make sure we use a hoop that is closest to the size of the actual design as possible to reduce movement within the frame. We're also going to use a pair of 6-inch double-edged curve Ginger scissors. These are my all-time favorites, and I know we have this in our Amazon preferred products. If you go to our site, this is a must-have for every embroiderer, especially if you're new. Now for our stabilizer, I'm going to use a 2.5 ounce cutaway stabilizer. Because this is a sweatshirt and it's a fairly thick material, I'm not really too worried about stabilizer shadows, so I'd rather have the extra security to make sure it's going to work well with an applique. And lastly, I have my template. The template is very important for this one because I'm going to show you a little trick on how you can pre-cut the holes on the inside of the A's before you get started. Now there's two different ways to do an applique. One is if you have a provided SVG file and you do have a cutter, that is by far the easiest way to make sure all the letters are cut out perfectly based on the design while it's digitized. Many people when you get started don't have those extra toys, so you do it by hand using a pair of quality scissors like this 6-inch double-edged curve. These have that curved edge that's going upwards, and that really helps to reduce the possibility of cutting into the fabric of the actual sweatshirt. Because it's pointing up, you are only going to really cut the applique and you're not going to cut into the sweatshirt. They're super sharp, and that curve definitely helps have any potential problems. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my template out so that I know it's going to fit within the hoop. So I'm going to get rid of most of the excess paper around the outside, and I'm going to also cut along the bottom as well. And then after I have this cut as straight as possible, then I'm going to go into the center of the two eyes, because these two center points right here, those are almost impossible to cut the material while it's actually in place. So I'm going to literally come in here and put a little hole with the scissors right inside that piece of paper, and I'm going to cut a hole right in the center of this one as well. So I have two holes right through there, that area right there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and put it right over top of my piece of material that I use as an applique, and I'm going to pre-mark those two holes with a marker so that I know where to place it when it actually is laid down on the machine. So I have my Sharpie here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very quickly do a tiny little dot in each of those holes. So I've marked my holes on either side, and now I can see a little mark there and a little mark there. And what I'm going to do is I'm very carefully going to cross over this piece just like that, fold it over twice, and I'm going to cut a tiny little hole right there, and I'm going to cut on this side right here and do the same thing, cross it over twice, so I have a little corner right where I marked it with the marker, and I'm going to cut this one as well. And then when I come back over here and I look at this area and I see this piece here, they're going to line up perfectly to the holes, so when I lay it down, I'm going to have no issues. Now, just to make sure I don't mess this up, I'm going to put a little arrow going up as well, so I know which is the top part of the design. If you don't mark it, you might put it on backwards and it might line up afterwards. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hoop my shirt, and whenever I hoop an item, I always pre-gauge my hoop, and that is how you loosen the hoop before you actually try to hoop it. I always gauge that by the thickness of the fabric. I turn it over one time, pinch it between my finger and my thumb. I see a visual gauge there, and then I will try to preset my hoop based on that space that I saw. So right now I can see the space here is really far apart. I'm going to bring that a little bit closer together so that the space is closer to what I saw between my finger and my thumb. So now that it's actually preset, I'm going to put the placement of my design down, and generally for a sweatshirt I want to make sure that I am centered from the bottom of the collar down. I want to have it around this part right here, a little bit up from the bottom of the arms, and I don't want this to be too high up close to the neck or too far down closer to the stomach. So placement is important. There are gauges that we have available for doing placement based on different sizes, but if you're just learning, one of the best things to do is to actually put your template down, pin it in place, and then lift your shirt up and visually see if it looks good, you know, in front of a mirror or on whoever it's going to be done for. One other thing that makes hooping for sweatshirts difficult is we have to actually hoop in a tubular fashion, which means that you have to come in through the body or in through the neck. Obviously the body is going to be easier, and if you don't have a hooping station, which does by far make the hooping easier to do because you can slide the shirt right over top of that and you can actually have your stabilizer held in place by magnets, you do need to take the steps of having it on a flat surface and putting your template in first and making sure that it looks as straight as possible horizontally, and vertically is right up to the center point of your collar is important. So the first thing I'm going to do is just pin this in place, and then I will hoop the shirt and the stabilizer together. So I think visually this is going to be good. I'm going to just come in through the neck and I'll just pin the top part of this in place just like that. And I might just leave it like that with only a pin in the top. Then I'm going to turn this around so I can get in through the bottom of the shirt. So I'm going to move my hooping station out of the way. We're going to flip this around. So I'm going to take my stabilizer and I'll just make sure that I have enough stabilizer to cover the entire length of the hoop, and I'll probably add an extra inch or so. And then what I'm going to do, because I'm not using a hooping station, is I'm going to use a little bit of tape to hold this in place so it's actually not going to move. So this is going to be the bottom part of the hoop. I'm just going to get a little bit of tape and hold this in place. So I'll just flip this over and I'm going to temporarily hold this in place. The last thing you want is for your stabilizer to move while you're trying to get things hooped, and this makes it a lot easier so that we reduce the movement. Now I need to make a decision again as to where I want the hoop to actually be placed on the machine, and I'm going to make sure that it's actually this way so that I have the opening in through the body as opposed to the neck. So now I've laid it in place and I have it right below the neck. I can see the hoop right here. If I go around the outside, I can see that I am off probably a little bit, so I can try to position it centered into the hoop. I'm going to make sure that when I drop the needle down, it's going to be right on that little crosshair. And now I'm going to take this part of the hoop and I'm going to put it in place on the top. And again, I'm just going to make sure visually that this line is meeting straight across here, and this line actually is right here, this line is over here, so it does visually appear that it seems to be square. I'm going to push from the top with my fingers, then inch my palms down and move forward and down at the same time. Now again, the important thing is I preset my hoop, so I didn't have to go in there and try to fiddle around and fight with the hoop. It's not popping out, it's in there nice and tight. I might give it that little bit of a oomph around all of the edges so that I know it's inset a lot. The last thing I ever want to try to do is to tighten my hoop after I've hooped it, because that's when you get hoop burn within your garments. You'll get that little area where it looks like it's pinched on your fabric and it'll be visual, and that's because people try to tighten things while it's hooped. So now I can see that everything looks nice and straight all the way across. I didn't put a pin in the very bottom, so just for a second I'm just going to put this in place, make sure that the line is straight down, and that way when I go to put this on the machine I know that my template isn't going to move. And remember, if you do want to double check, most of your hoops will come with a grid. that will allow you to put it in place. It fits right into the notches that are in the hoops themselves, and that way you can check to make sure that your actual X and Y are in line with your actual design. I can see that here and here it's pretty much the exact same space all the way, so we did just visually get this lined up pretty much perfectly. But if you do want to just make sure, then that's what this little grid is perfect for, to make sure that you are always going to be positioned straight when you're doing your template. We have our design loaded in the machine, so I'm going to turn this inside out. Because this is not a tubular machine, it's a flatbed machine, we have to make sure that we turn the garment inside out and almost make a little bowl that we're going to be going on the inside. So now that it's turned inside out, and I can remove my tape, I had my tape here that I had put down to hold my stabilizer in place, and I can see that it actually did serve its purpose. And now I'm going to take this piece here and I'm going to slide it underneath the needle and make sure that I get the hoop in place, and then I have to make sure that I get everything out of the way and almost create a little bowl so that we can get to the design on the inside. If you have some clamps or things that you can use to hold all of the excess material out of the way, it is definitely a little easier to work with, but we will need to make sure that we watch the machine as it sews. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to move it so that I am definitely centered, and let's just drop that down, and I'm just going to make sure that I am exactly centered in place to my template, and that looks to be right on the money. Now I'm going to lift my presser foot, and I'm just going to remove my tape from my template and take the template away. The first stitch it always does in an applique is what's called a placement stitch, and that is going to show me where to put my piece of applique material that we pre-cut the holes in. Now because we're so limited on space within the hoop, because we've had to dig that little bowl, I'm just going to cut away some of the excess material so it is going to fit in there a little bit easier. So I'll just take off a little bit off that end. This end seems to be almost fine, but I'll just cut off a little bit of the excess. And then what we're going to do is we are going to place that into the area. It's laid down our placement stitches on the inside, so I can see the word mama. Those are all of our placement stitches. Now I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to put it down, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up those little holes that I made right into the center of those A's, and both of them should line up perfectly because we pre-cut them. There is one right there, so there is one of the holes that I made, and I'm just making sure that I line up the hole right to this area of the center of the A. So I've pre-cut the hole. Then I'm going to go to the other side, and knowing that that's in place, I'm going to check the other side and make sure that the center of the A is right there. It needs to go just up a tiny little bit, and now I know that that's covering that side. Let's get this material underneath the needle, and if I check again on this side, I can see that side is pretty much in place as well. So that should pretty much give me perfect coverage on both sides. Now what I can do at this point is just take a little bit of tape, and we're just going to hold this in place in a couple of areas so we know that it's not going to move within the machine. Put a piece of tape there and there. Now I know that's held securely. If I want to, I can put one piece over here, and on the other side we'll just make sure that this is held down securely as well. Now I'm going to very carefully take this off of the machine, and I want to be careful because I don't want any movement to happen right now. I have to make sure that I cut away all of the excess material and put it back on the machine without really, distorting anything that is within the hoop. So I'm going to unhoop it, and I'm going to very, very carefully try to position myself forward, and I'm gonna have to get this material out of the way first. Okay, I have it off the machine, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn it back the right way for a moment, just so that I can get into all of the areas that need to be cut. Now that we have it flat again, I'm going to remove the tape, and then I can start to cut out my pieces. The 6-inch double-edged curve allows me to get in underneath of these objects. It's given more stability to the fabric. Definitely took a little bit of finesse, and we had to be very, very gentle so that we didn't actually move the frame within the machine. We need to be very, very careful and to watch this like a hawk to make sure that it's not going to sew into any of the areas as it moves around. For all you Embroidery Design Club members, be sure to print off the accompanying cheat sheet recipe card for this video. Don't forget that as an Embroidery Design Club member, you can instantly download all your cheat sheet recipe cards to help you quickly and easily embroider virtually anything. Plus, you'll also get access to over 30,000 embroidery design, bonus projects, free giveaways, live training, and more. Click the link in the description below to learn more about our fan favorite embroidery club now. Okay, well, it's done, and we're just going to take it out of the hoop. And rather than try to slide it out through the actual bracket, I'm just going to push and release it and remove it like this, make it a little bit easier. Now that it's done, we don't have to worry about it as much. And when we take the hoop out, place it to the side, turn it just like that, and we need to just clean it up a little bit, get rid of the stabilizer, but I think that looks great. Okay, let's just trim a couple areas up. The machine did a great job. Everything looks pretty clean for the most part, and I'm really impressed with the stitch quality of that machine. Even though it isn't tubular, it still got the job done, and it just meant that I had to sit and watch it to make sure that nothing got trapped, but I think that looks great. We're just going to turn it inside out now and trim off any threads, get rid of the stabilizer. And I'm going to again use my 6-inch double-edged curves because I know that they get in nice and close, and as long as the blade is pointed upwards, I don't have to worry about cutting through the top. So I'm going to get as close as I can all the way around, trim a few of the threads up, and I think we'll be ready to go. There's our design. It is finished. I think it looks fantastic. So let me know in the comments what you think of this design. I think it looks great. It's nice and clean. Definitely would have been easier if we would have used the SVG files, but it took a little bit of time, but it came out crisp and clean. So let us know if you'd like to see that SVG tutorial and watch this video next. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.